I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen bee.
The invitations had not yet been printed. The guest list remained locked inside a palace folder. But the decision had already been made. Camilla would host an intimate memorial tea honoring the late Queen. Then Sophie Wessex entered the room, read the proposal, and delivered a response no one expected. She would not support it. Within minutes, a quiet remembrance became a royal confrontation over loyalty, legitimacy, and who had the right to speak for Elizabeth's legacy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Sophie did not hesitate. She closed the planning folder, placed her palm over the proposed program, and looked at the private secretary. This cannot proceed under her name. The effect was immediate. The secretary understood that she was not requesting a change to the flowers, menu, or timing. She was formally blocking the plan for Camilla to host Queen Elizabeth II's memorial tea and ordering every preparation to stop. The gathering was never an ordinary royal engagement. It was a private anniversary tea at Windsor for senior women of the royal family, former ladies-in-waiting, household staff, and companions who had served Elizabeth personally. Ladies-in-waiting were trusted female attendants who supported the monarch, often forming part of her closest circle. Sophie believed those people deserved a host whose connection to the late Queen could not be questioned. Camilla felt the rejection like a verdict delivered behind closed doors. She had already discussed the seating plan, selected the menu, and begun shaping her remarks. Now the Queen Consort, the title held by the reigning king's wife, was being told she could attend, but she could not preside. She would not deliver the principal tribute. She would not occupy the central seat associated with the woman representing Elizabeth's household circle. To her, the distinction felt less like protocol and more like humiliation. Sophie refused to soften her position. She did not want Camilla excluded, and she did not deny the role she held beside Charles. But the trusted confidant believed remembrance could not become a demonstration of present authority. One wrong gesture, one altered seat, one speech centered on the current reign, and the tea would cease to belong to the woman it was created to honor. Charles received the news without anger. The king read the suspended program, set it down, and resisted demands for an immediate reversal. Then he asked the question that changed the room. Why does she feel so strongly? To understand Sophie's defiance, the palace had to confront the private loyalties binding all three royals to the woman whose absence still shaped every room. This was never simply a dispute over tea, flowers, or seating. For Sophie, the gathering belonged to a relationship built through years of trust. For Camilla, hosting it represented acceptance at the center of royal life. For Charles, it reopened a wound he had never fully expressed, the grief of a son who inherited his mother's crown, but could never inherit her presence. One empty chair now carried the emotional weight of the entire monarchy. Sophie understood why that chair mattered. Queen Elizabeth II had not treated her merely as another relative expected to smile, attend ceremonies, and follow palace instructions. Through family gatherings, official duties, and quiet conversations away from public attention, the monarch had come to rely upon her discretion. An official duty was an engagement performed on behalf of the crown, yet their connection had reached far beyond formal obligations. Elizabeth trusted her calmness, especially during moments when the family's private tensions threatened to break through its polished surface. Sophie sat alone, holding an old handwritten place card bearing her name. She remembered one of their final family teas, when the Queen had placed her nearby and spoken to her without ceremony or distance. The memory struck harder now. To the trusted confidant, Elizabeth had been a woman who noticed fear, remembered small kindnesses, and understood silence. Allowing the memorial to become a display of modern authority felt like betraying that private bond. Camilla carried a different pain. The Queen Consort, the title given to the reigning king's wife, believed hosting the tea would show that the present reign could honor the previous monarch without being imprisoned by comparison. She sat before a draft of her memorial remarks, crossing out one sentence after another. Every tribute felt dangerous, too warm, and she would be accused of claiming intimacy, too restrained, and she would appear cold toward the woman whose crown now shaped her life. Charles received both messages before nightfall. Sophie's note was brief, careful, and firm. Camilla's was deeply personal. She wrote that the blocked plan proved she would never be allowed to occupy her role without someone using Elizabeth's memory to question whether she belonged. The king read the words twice because he understood her fear, and because he also understood why Sophie could not retreat. The pressure deepened when Charles learned that several former members of his mother's household quietly supported Sophie. A royal household is the group of staff and attendants serving a monarch in official and personal life. These people had not protested publicly, but they believed the memorial should be led by someone connected to Elizabeth's private circle, not by the machinery of the current court. Charles prepared to summon Sophie. Then an aide stopped beside him and delivered the warning no one had expected. This conflict had not begun with the memorial proposal. It had begun months earlier, during another private tea, when an invitation vanished. A familiar tradition was altered, and Sophie made a promise she believed Camilla had ignored. The blocked memorial was only the visible rupture. Beneath it waited the incident that had turned quiet discomfort into open resistance. Months before the memorial plan reached Sophie's hands, a smaller gathering had taken place at Windsor. It received no public announcement and attracted no cameras. Yet those who attended remembered the tension clearly. A chair associated with Queen Elizabeth had been moved. A longtime companion had been removed from the guest list. And when Sophie asked who had authorized the changes, the answer led directly to Camilla. That quiet afternoon became the point of no return. Sophie had helped prepare the gathering as a private thank you for several retired members of Queen Elizabeth's household. A royal household is the group of attendants, advisors, and staff who support a monarch in both official and personal duties. She expected the tea to preserve the familiar customs of the late queen, because the guests were not strangers to Elizabeth's life. They were people who had served beside her, protected her privacy, and carried memories no palace record could fully capture. Then Sophie noticed the missing name. Lady Susan, a longtime companion of the late monarch, had vanished from the final seating plan after the event was redefined as a gathering representing the new reign. The trusted confidant checked the list twice. Her concern deepened when she entered the room and found Elizabeth's customary chair moved away from the center. In its place stood a new ceremonial seat intended for Camilla. Sophie stopped beside the empty space. To everyone else, it might have appeared to be a simple adjustment. To her, it felt like a message. The woman who had shaped that room for decades was being pushed quietly toward its edge, while those connected to her private world were being removed one by one. Camilla rejected that interpretation when Sophie confronted her privately. The queen consort insisted that no disrespect had been intended. She argued that royal households could not preserve every room exactly as Elizabeth had left it, and that the monarchy had to acknowledge the present reign. Yet her words only sharpened the wound. Sophie heard not practicality, but dismissal, a suggestion that loyalty, memory, and tradition had become inconvenient. Sophie asked the question directly beside the tea table. Was Lady Susan removed on your instruction? Camilla paused before answering. Then she admitted that she had approved the revised list because she wanted the gathering to reflect the current household rather than remain fixed around the old one. The admission changed everything. Sophie lowered her voice and made a promise. Any future event held explicitly in Elizabeth's memory would not be transformed into a display of the new court's authority. Camilla dismissed the warning as grief speaking through emotion. She believed the anger would fade once the tea ended, but Sophie remembered every word. When the later memorial proposal gave Camilla control of the guest list, the principal speech, and the central seat, the trusted confidant recognized the same pattern. This time, she would not object quietly. The old wound had returned in a far more dangerous form, and when Sophie was finally called before Camilla, neither woman entered the room prepared to retreat. There were no advisors between them, no carefully prepared statements, and no audience to soften the impact. Sophie entered the private drawing room carrying the suspended program. Camilla remained standing beside the fireplace, refusing to offer the comfort of an ordinary greeting. What followed was not an argument about protocol. It was a collision between two women defending different versions of loyalty, one to the late queen's memory, the other to the authority of the living king. Camilla had requested the meeting before Charles became directly involved. She hoped the disagreement could remain inside the family, rather than become a formal dispute between royal households, the separate teams of staff who organize each senior royal's duties and private affairs. Sophie arrived carrying the original program, the revised guest list, and handwritten notes from former members of Elizabeth's staff. Those notes mattered because the guests had expected the memorial to preserve the late monarch's personal traditions, not introduce a new hierarchy. Camilla did not waste time. She accused Sophie of treating her like an outsider and demanded to know whether anything she did in Elizabeth's honor would ever be accepted. The queen consort kept her voice controlled, but her hand tightened around the back of a chair. She had spent years enduring comparisons, suspicion, and quiet judgment. Hosting the tea had represented more than ceremony. It had offered proof that she could honor the past without being permanently rejected by it. Sophie held her ground. She told Camilla that attending the gathering and leading it were not the same thing. The trusted confidant did not question her place beside Charles, but she refused to let the memorial become evidence of royal status. "You cannot make this about your reign when the room is meant to remember hers," she said. The words landed with brutal force. Camilla finally disclosed what Sophie had not known. Charles had personally encouraged her to accept the visible role. The king feared that attending such an intimate gathering would overwhelm him, because the familiar names, customs, and empty chair would force him to confront his mother's absence without the protection of public ceremony. Camilla had agreed to host partly to shield him from grief. Sophie felt the certainty beneath her anger shift. For several seconds, she said nothing. Yet she did not surrender. Instead, she proposed that the event be jointly led by herself and Princess Anne, the king's sister, with Anne delivering the central remembrance. Camilla could attend beside Charles, but she would not control the private guest list or give the principal tribute. Camilla opened the folder, removed her unfinished memorial speech, and placed it between them. She told Sophie that the argument had now moved beyond compromise. Charles would decide, and he would have to choose which woman's judgment he trusted. But the king's authority was not the only force shaping the memorial. Behind Sophie stood old loyalties, household traditions, and voices Camilla had not expected to resist her. Camilla possessed rank. Charles possessed the final word. Yet Sophie had something more difficult to challenge: the confidence of those who had guarded Queen Elizabeth's private world for decades. Former staff members answered her calls. Retired companions trusted her intentions. Even Princess Anne understood why the memorial's smallest details mattered. What appeared to be one woman's objection was becoming a disciplined defense of an unwritten royal boundary, and Charles could no longer dismiss it as hurt feelings. Sophie's influence had never depended on ceremony alone. She had spent years acting as a bridge between senior royals, working family members, and those who remained devoted to Elizabeth after leaving palace service. Working royals are members of the family who perform official duties on behalf of the monarch. These relationships mattered because the memorial tea had no legal force behind it. No constitutional command could make it meaningful. Its legitimacy depended upon trust, willing attendance, and the presence of people who had known the late queen beyond the crown. Princess Anne understood the danger immediately. She met Sophie privately and warned that resisting Camilla could easily be interpreted as resisting Charles himself. The king's sister did not question the purpose of the objection, but she knew how quickly private loyalty could be recast as public rebellion. Sophie listened without interrupting. Then she answered with quiet resolve. She could endure royal anger more easily than the knowledge that she had remained silent when Elizabeth's memory needed protection. Charles felt the pressure closing around him. He studied the guest responses one by one, aware that supporting Camilla without compromise might alienate those closest to his mother. Yet overruling his wife would deepen her belief that she would always stand beneath Elizabeth's shadow. The monarch had inherited authority, but authority offered no simple answer when love, grief, and loyalty pulled in opposite directions. Then Charles reached a handwritten note from one of his mother's retired attendants. He read the final line, removed his glasses, and placed the paper carefully on the desk. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. The message was respectful but devastating. Several former household members would decline the invitation if the gathering appeared designed to celebrate the current court rather than remember the woman they had served. Their absence would destroy the event's purpose. A memorial without Elizabeth's closest circle would become an empty performance, polished in form but stripped of emotional truth. Charles finally understood that Sophie was not threatening the gathering. She was warning him that it might collapse without the people whose memories gave it meaning. The king requested a revised proposal, but Camilla heard about his instruction before Sophie did. Realizing that her husband had not automatically defended her, she made a decision that pushed the conflict beyond the planning room. Feeling isolated and diminished before the event had even been announced, Camilla withdrew from more than the memorial, and the palace immediately began to feel the consequences. Camilla did not shout. She did not issue an ultimatum. She simply returned the memorial speech, canceled 2 planning meetings, and withdrew from a scheduled family luncheon at Windsor. The silence of those actions struck harder than open fury. Staff members began choosing their words carefully. Charles became increasingly withdrawn, and Sophie, despite achieving the suspension she wanted, discovered that victory carried an emotional price she had not prepared herself to pay. Camilla informed her private secretary that she would take no further part in planning the memorial tea until Charles confirmed whether she was its rightful host or merely an unwanted guest. A private secretary is a senior aide who manages a royal's official work, correspondence, and sensitive arrangements. Her withdrawal immediately created confusion. Caterers, florists, musicians, and invited guests had already been contacted under provisional instructions from the king, and no one knew which orders still stood. Camilla opened the red dispatch folder containing her handwritten tribute. A dispatch folder is a secure case used to carry official or confidential papers. She removed the first page, read the opening lines once more, and tore it in half. Then she stopped. The anger disappeared as quickly as it had risen, leaving something more painful behind. She placed the remaining pages inside a drawer and closed it with trembling hands. Sophie felt the consequences before anyone confronted her. When she learned that Camilla had canceled the Windsor luncheon, the trusted confidant understood that the dispute had cut into the family itself. She had wanted to protect Elizabeth's memory, not deepen the distance between Charles and his wife. The suspension felt necessary, yet it no longer felt like success. Charles summoned Sophie soon afterward. The king did not hide his frustration. He asked whether she had considered what publicly rejecting Camilla's leadership would do to a woman who had spent years fearing that she would never be fully accepted. His wife had treated the memorial as an act of service. Now she saw the rejection as confirmation that Elizabeth's memory would always be used to measure and diminish her. Sophie absorbed the accusation, but refused to abandon her principle. She told Charles that harmony purchased through silence was not harmony at all. It merely delayed the same conflict until the next memorial, the next altered guest list, or the next symbolic chair. Then she made an offer that changed the argument completely. Sophie would surrender her own claim to host. She proposed that Elizabeth's former household organize the gathering, allowing those who had served the late queen to protect its tone and traditions. No current royal would use the occasion to elevate personal status. Camilla would not control it, but neither would Sophie. Charles stared at her, recognizing for the first time that she was not fighting for prominence. That evening, he asked her to remain after the officials departed. He wanted to speak not as king, but as Elizabeth's son. With the palace machinery silenced, Charles and Sophie were left alone with the grief neither had dared to express. The turning point did not arrive through a council meeting or a signed order. It came in a small room after dusk, when Charles dismissed the final aide and asked Sophie to sit. For the first time, he admitted that the memorial tea frightened him. Every detail, the cups, the flowers, the familiar names, threatened to return him to a world in which his mother still waited at the head of the table. Sophie finally understood what Camilla had been protecting. Charles spoke without the distance of a monarch. He explained that he had asked Camilla to host because she had watched him struggle through earlier anniversaries and understood how deeply the memories unsettled him. The king believed that allowing his wife to carry the formal burden, the duty of leading the event, and keeping attention away from his private grief, would let him attend without becoming the emotional center of the gathering. Sophie listened as the anger inside her began to loosen. She told Charles that she had never wanted Camilla excluded from the family's sorrow. The trusted confidant feared something different, that control over the guest list, speech, and traditions could erase the people whose personal service gave the memorial its meaning. If those closest to Elizabeth felt pushed aside, the gathering would honor her crown while forgetting her human relationships. Charles lowered his voice. He admitted that Sophie's intervention had made him feel he had failed both his mother and his wife. Supporting Camilla seemed like a betrayal of Elizabeth's circle. Resisting her seemed like proof that he had invited his wife into a role she would never truly be allowed to hold. His voice broke as he confessed that he was exhausted by the belief that honoring one woman must always wound the other. Sophie reached across the table but stopped before touching his hand. She told Charles that Elizabeth's memory did not demand a choice between past and present. It demanded that neither be used as a weapon against the other. Then she offered the compromise that finally changed the direction of the conflict. Sophie proposed that the late queen's former household shape the private customs. Princess Anne would deliver the principal remembrance, meaning the central tribute honoring Elizabeth's life. The trusted confidant would welcome the guests, while Camilla would sit beside Charles as his wife, rather than preside as the official host. Charles understood the sacrifice immediately. Sophie had removed herself from the most prestigious role, while preserving Camilla's dignity and protecting Elizabeth's closest circle. Yet one uncertainty remained. Would the queen consort accept a place of honor without control? The king refused to send an aide. He rose and asked Sophie to accompany him to Camilla's rooms. They carried no folders, no prepared statements, and no royal commands, only an offer that would survive if the respect behind it felt real. By morning, the palace had a new memorial plan, but before the family could absorb the compromise, news of Sophie's intervention escaped beyond the gates. The private agreement lasted less than 12 hours before a single headline transformed it into a national argument. Across the front page of a morning newspaper, two photographs appeared side by side: Sophie beside Queen Elizabeth at a final public ceremony, and Camilla entering the palace alone. Between them ran 6 words: Sophie stops Camilla's memorial takeover. The language was brutal, the image unforgettable, and the settlement Charles had carefully built was suddenly being judged by millions. Palace communications staff moved quickly, but their response offered little comfort. They confirmed only that the memorial arrangements had been revised and refused to identify who had suspended the original plan. Palace communications staff are the advisors responsible for managing official statements and explaining royal decisions to the public. Their silence was meant to protect the family. Instead, it allowed every broadcaster and commentator to create a different version of the conflict. Sophie watched the story grow beyond anything she had intended. One television presenter described her as an alternative royal matriarch, suggesting that the trusted confidant was challenging Camilla for influence over the family. She switched off the screen before the discussion ended. Protecting Elizabeth's memory had been turned into a struggle for power, and Sophie knew the accusation could damage the very loyalty she had tried to defend. Camilla discovered the headline at breakfast. She did not complain or demand that it be removed. The queen consort simply folded the newspaper inward until her own photograph disappeared, then asked an aide whether Charles had seen it. Her restraint carried more pain than anger. Once again, her place beside the king was being debated by strangers, while her private attempt to shield him from grief had been recast as a takeover. Charles understood that silence was now dangerous. Broadcasters had framed the dispute as a battle between personal devotion to Queen Elizabeth and the institutional authority of his wife. Institutional authority meant the influence attached to Camilla's official role within the present reign. If the monarch defended her too strongly, he risked appearing dismissive of his mother's closest circle. If he remained quiet, the public humiliation would deepen. Outside Windsor Castle, the argument found a human face. A small crowd gathered near the gates carrying flowers and handwritten cards for Elizabeth. One woman placed a teacup decorated with corgis beside the tributes. The simple gesture spread rapidly across social media, becoming a symbol of affection untouched by rank or palace politics. Charles finally authorized a statement. The memorial would be a shared family remembrance shaped by those who had served the late queen, while Camilla would attend beside him in a position of personal honor. The words calmed the institutional crisis, but they could not prove that the private wounds had healed. That verdict would come inside the memorial, when Sophie and Camilla faced each other before the people whose memories had caused the confrontation. When the guests finally took their places, titles mattered less than one gesture that revealed whether the family had truly reconciled. The memorial tea began without an announcement of victory. No one entered as the defeated party, and no royal name appeared above another on the program. At the center of the room stood Queen Elizabeth's familiar chair, left respectfully empty. Sophie welcomed the guests. Anne delivered the remembrance. Charles listened with his head lowered. Then Camilla performed one quiet gesture that ended the conflict more powerfully than any palace statement ever could. Sophie had helped preserve the late queen's personal traditions without allowing the gathering to belong to any current royal household. Former attendants, trusted companions, and family members were seated according to their connection with Elizabeth rather than their rank. A royal household is the circle of staff and attendants who support a monarch in official and private life. That distinction mattered, because the people gathered there had not come to honor power. They had come to remember a woman they had personally served and loved. Sophie opened the gathering with a short welcome. She made no reference to the dispute, the suspended plan, or the painful arguments behind closed doors. Instead, the trusted confidant spoke about service, memory, and the need to let grief unite people rather than place them in order of importance. Anne listened before delivering the central remembrance, while the king remained silent beside his wife. Camilla entered with Charles and immediately noticed the empty ceremonial chair. For a moment, the queen consort appeared unsettled. Then the meaning became clear. Leaving Elizabeth's place untouched was not an attempt to diminish Camilla. It acknowledged that the late monarch occupied a position no wife, daughter, sister, or successor was expected to replace. Camilla approached the central table carrying flowers selected from Elizabeth's Windsor garden. Sophie watched her place the vase beside the empty chair. Their eyes met, and the anger that had divided them softened into recognition. Instead of taking the prominent seat once planned for her, Camilla moved beside Charles and gestured for Sophie to continue. With that single act, she accepted the revised order without bitterness. Camilla waited until the final guest had departed before speaking privately. She told Sophie that blocking the original plan had wounded her deeply, but the gathering had proved that the intervention was never an attempt to seize influence. Sophie apologized for the pain she had caused, yet she did not apologize for protecting the memorial's purpose. Charles ended the dispute with a clear family understanding. Future private commemorations of Queen Elizabeth would be shaped jointly by relatives and those who had known her household personally. They would never become tools for establishing status or settling questions of precedence, the formal order determining who holds priority within royal life. Sophie's stand protected Elizabeth's memory. Camilla's final gesture preserved her dignity. Charles learned that continuity did not require replacing the past. No woman defeated another. Instead, both accepted that the late Queen's legacy belonged to shared service, honest grief, and remembrance untouched by ambition. There was no further battle to fight. The empty chair had spoken, and everyone finally understood where honor ended and ambition had to stop. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.